Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be taking a look at a Mew Lock deck from the 2006 format. Now, this deck has gone by several different names. Mew Lock, I think, is the most common. Minx is another name for the deck. And ultimately, maybe the most accurate name is POW Control. So the main strategy of the deck is that we are going to be using this Mew EX, which can use the attacks of all Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponents, to take advantage of some very disruptive Pokemon in the format. It's very different disruptive attacks to basically control your opponent. Now, the idea is that you kind of goat your opponent into taking the first prize. Once they take that first prize, you have access to POW hand extension to start getting very disruptive with a lot of little tricks the deck can do. And then you use Minimum to repeatedly search out that POW hand extension so you have more disruption, more options. And then once you do that, essentially you get to the point of the game where your opponent just really can't respond to anything. And then you start using Jinx's pure power to spread damage counters to your opponent's board. One of the biggest parts of the deck is you never take a prize. And what I mean by that is the entire game, you just avoid taking prizes. So if your opponent does ever get out of the lock for a turn and they're able to get a knockout, you try to Rockets admin them to a low hand size, you're going to get 6 cards off the Rockets admin, and then you try to set up the lock again. Now, and then essentially in the last couple turns of the game, that's where you come in and you end up taking 6 prize cards over the span of 2, maybe 3 turns tops. So essentially, let's go ahead and just jump right on in to the cards here. We play 3 copies of Mew EX. We like to start with Mew. Mew is definitely the preferred attacker in the deck, but if we don't open with Mew, that's okay as well. The deck is so tight on space, generally it's not worth playing the 4th copy of Mew just for the slight increased chance of starting with it. But that versatile Pokebody just gives us so many different options, not only from our own Pokemon, but from our opponents as well. It's also important to remember that in the 2006 format, there wasn't Cessation Crystal, so there wasn't anything reliable that was going to shut off that Mew EX's Pokebody here. We play a 2-2 Wobbuffet line. Now, essentially what Wobbuffet does is if you evolve it from Why Not, your opponent pays 1 more to retreat his or her active Pokemon. Now, this really comes into play when we're trying to control our opponent with things like POW hand extension or Roselia's Flick Poison, where something that maybe would be very easy to retreat, like let's say a Pidgeot, for example, that Wobbuffet's going to add a single retreat cost to it. So then when we go ahead and use Flick Poison to bring it up, instead of being able to free retreat that Pidgeot back, they do have to pay an energy to retreat it or burn a switch card. Either of those situations we are perfectly fine with. Now, ideally you get 2 Wobbuffet in play, and then just something like a Pidgeot's never going to reliably retreat. But in most games, we settle for just a single copy of Wobbuffet, and that's why we play the 2-2 line, just to help with prizes. Jinx, we play 2 copies of Jinx. We never want to have a slugfest with our opponent. We never want to fight fairly. We're always going to look for little tricks and be really deceptive with things. We never want to play a fair game with our opponent, and that's why we use those pure powers to essentially try to lock something in the active spot and then just spread around it. It's also worth noting that we don't play the under-evolved form of Jinx, the Smoochum. We really don't care about the body here. We just want that pure power on the bench. 2 copies of Minimum. Just being able to use that Sniff Out attack is just so strong. This is a deck where we're going to have time. We're going to try to Flick Poison something active like a Pidgeot or, a Blastoise EX, for example. And we're not going to make any aggressive plays. We'll sit there and just go Sniff Out turn after turn after turn, keep getting all those resources back. Our opponent's not going to be able to put any aggressive pressure on the board with all of our POW hand extensions and other tricks in the deck. So we got a lot of time with the deck, and having that Minimum to get back resources is just going to ensure that we win the long game. 1 Giraffe Rig. This serves a couple of different purposes. One, it shuts off Jirachi from Deoxys, and it shuts off Beldum. Both are very, very strong Pokemon powers that come from basics, and we don't want to have our opponent have access to that. Now, the other thing is it's twofold here. The second part is the Foresight. looking at the top 5 cards of either player's deck and put them back on top of that deck in any order you like. Incredibly, incredibly strong. Essentially, we're going to ensure that our opponent never draws anything. So a very common in state is we're going to Rockets admin our opponent to maybe 1 or 2 cards, foresight the top of their deck, and unless they have a really good 1 or 2 cards there, they're just never going to draw anything. And we'll set up situations where we'll say we know the top 3 cards of their deck are all dead, and then the 4th and 5th card are good. So we'll take 3 free turns and then foresight again, and ideally do that same situation where we put dead cards on top, and then as soon as we know our opponent's going to draw a live card, we foresight them again, or we play a Rockets admin and foresight. It's just such a strong combo. In different situations, disorder can also be very useful, but I just cannot undersell how strong foresight is and how annoying foresight is to play against. It just it gives us this feeling of helplessness to our opponent where they just don't feel like they're ever going to be able to get out of it. 1 copy of Roselia, that Flick Poison. It's going to be very strong in matchups that rely on bench setters. Things like LBS, for example. We want to be able to Flick Poison up that Blastoise. Don't give them all those free attachments. Another great example would be something like Metagross Dragonite, where we want to be able to Flick Poison up a Metagross and be able to spread around it. Same thing with like a Dragonite. Just a lot of different options there. 1 copy of Stantler. This is new to, this is kind of my addition to the deck, and I can't say I came up with it because the RS to PK format really showed how effective of not only an attacker the Stantler is, and it just makes so much sense to play it in this deck. If our opponent tries to get really clever and not really bench a whole lot of stuff for us to take advantage of our POW hand extensions, it's really easy for us just to go Screechy Voice to confuse their active. And early on in the game, if we are going, let's say, a Rockets admin, we're putting our opponent at 4, 5, 6 cards, we can use that push away attack just to try to A, strip any decent cards out of their hand, and B, really play that resource war where we're stripping maybe a Stadium or even something like a Rare Candy, a Holin's Transceiver, a Steven's Advice. And then we have Sniff Out to constantly get our resources back, and then we're constantly getting rid of theirs. I absolutely love the 1 copy of Stantler in here. It's been phenomenal for me. We do play 1 copy of the Unknown here, and it has the Hidden Power attack. So essentially, if your opponent's bench isn't full, you look at his or her hand, you can choose a basic Pokemon in there and put it onto your opponent's bench, and then you bring it active, and it's asleep. Oh, I'm sorry, no, it's not asleep. You just bring it active. And essentially why we play this is because a lot of really smart opponents will try to avoid benching stuff against us, so we're not able to POW it active, or you use Flick Poison to bring it active. And this puts them in a situation where they're basically forced to. And there's a couple of different tricks you can use to ensure that you're getting a good hidden power off. 1 example is you can Rockets admin and then hidden power trying to hit something. It also combos really well with Girafareg's Future Sight, where you know you're going to give your opponent a basic Pokemon, and then you know what's in their hand to hidden power. It's unfortunate it has that shuffle Pokepower because it's weak to Curse Stone, but at the same time too, we've got to be able to search. We have to be able to get additional basic Pokemon from our opponent into play. 1 copy of Lapras. Search our deck for a supporter, put it into our hand. You're going to note with this deck, we play a very, very heavy Hoenn line in here. So we play 4 Transceiver, we play a full 4 Mentor, and then 1 Hoenn Scientist, 1 Adventurer. And the idea behind the Lapras is that Hoenn Transceiver or Hoenn Mentor is both going to be an out to the Lapras. And there are certain situations in the game where we have to be able to find a Rockets admin. We have to be able to find a Scott. And being able to turn the Transceiver and Mentor into a Lapras to then in turn turn it into a Rockets admin or a Scott is just so incredibly strong. Now, going along with that as well, we also play 2 copies of Swoop Teleporter. So if we are unfortunate enough and we have to bench that Lapras, we can then turn it into something more useful in the later stages of the game. Now, the other unique thing about a Mew Lock deck is the original variation of the deck did not play energy. there was 0 energy. So if you filled out a deck list for a tournament, it would be like 30 Pokemon, 30 trainers, 0 energy. And it would look really weird because you would only play the Holen's Pokemon. You play so many basics in the deck, the odds of opening with a lone Holen's Pokemon were relatively low. You played Swoop Teleporter in case you were in that situation. And then on top of that, it just combos so well with not only our Holen Mentor, our Heavy Mentor engine, but also our Pokemon Retriever engine. Now, going along with that too, we also play 2 copies of Swoop Teleporter. So if we were unfortunate enough to open with one of the Holen's Pokemon, we would have some outs there as well. But a more updated list, and I did steal this from Jason Klaczynki, is to play a single copy of Warp Energy. This is useful against opposing Mew Lock decks, decks that play POW hand extension. We should never be up on prizes, but little tricks like that from our opponent that would maybe bring a Wobbuffet or something annoying active, this will give us an out to it. And the other important thing is to remember is with that Warp Energy, it's bounceable with cards like Holen's Castform. So in matchups where we do really need it, we can cycle it a whole bunch of times and get more than one use off of it. Now, so essentially we have the 4 Castform, and then we have 6 basic energies to attach, basic energies plus the warp. So we got 7 turn 1 attachable energies. This may seem very, very, very low for a deck, and it is, but it's important to remember that Holen Transceiver, Holen Mentor engine is going to be able to grab these for us. And once again, one of the advantages of the deck is we can play a very thick disruptive trainer lineup and a thicker Pokemon lineup because we can get away with so few energies. And this is one of these things, this is one of those decks where if you essentially have 1 energy here, you're happy. 1 energy lets you use Sniff Out, you can use Future Sight, Flick Poison, Screechy Voice, even Freezing Light. You have so many good attacks for a single energy, and then you have those Holen's Castforms to bounce the single energies. You get away with playing a low energy count very, very easily. Now, heading into the trainer lineup here, we play 4 Transceiver, 4 Mentor, 1 Scientist, 1 Adventure. Nothing better in this deck than a turn 1 Mentor. You really, really, really want to get that turn 1 Mentor going. 4 copies of Rocket's Admin. Like I talked about before, the entire deck, we always want to play from behind. We're always going to try to be down in prizes and then just come back at the end of the game and steal the game. We've got to play 4 copies of Rocket's Admin in the deck. It's just so incredibly strong. We have to try to keep limiting our opponent's options. You know, where if they take a couple of prizes, we want to be able to, you know, Battle Frontier, Rocket's Admin, just to keep them out of the game here. 2 copies of Steven's Advice. I like Stevens in this. You can play Mary's Request. I think Stevens in most situations is just going to be better. You can make an argument for Copycat as well, but this is one of those decks where Rocket's Admins are flying all over the place, and ideally we're going to try to keep our opponent at a very low hand size, so you're not going to get a ton of benefit from the Copycat. 1 copy of Scott. Want to be able to search out those Battle Frontiers. I think Scott's made a little bit better in this deck by the fact that we play the 1 copy of Lapras. So we can Lapras for Scott to the Battle Frontiers. We've got a nice little tutoring engine going there. 4 ER2s. This is mine, or my addition to the deck. But essentially what I found in a lot of the games I was testing was that opponents would try to play very smart and not take that first prize. They would try to build up resources, get a strong board, be in a strong position. And the ER2 helps goat the opponent into taking that first prize. So not only are we doing disruptive things like using Push Away or Flick Poison to try to get our opponent to take those first prize or 2 prizes, we're also going to use ER2. And not only is that one of those things where we can ER2 and then we can sniff out ER2 and basically say, hey, if you're not going to put pressure on me, I'm just going to keep searching out ER2s, and I'm going to be playing it every single turn. But there's also certain matchups like LBS, for example, where we want to get those energies off the board as quickly as possible. And you'll see things like from LBS player, for example, where they'll just throw 4 energies under a Blastoise and then just try to run through you. And you do have options in that situation. Like I said, you got your Flick Poison, your Screechy Voice, but those ER2s are just something that's going to kind of help us kind of stamp out that aggression. And not just against LBS, but just in general, we want to be able to stamp out that aggression and it's a good target to search out with Sniff Out. 4 copies of POW Hand Extension, just so incredibly strong in the deck. You can use it, like I said, you can use it offensively, you can use it defensively. Bring up something, your opponent's going to have a hard time getting out of the active spot. Just POW that Jirachi active with, thanks to Wobbuffet having 2 or 3 retreat costs, thanks to Girafarig have no abilities. They finally retreated out or they play a switching card, just bring it up again. And you're going to be able to do that over and over and over again. It's also really strong to do the opposite of that and really manipulate the energies. For example, like we talked about with the Blastoise, you can go Screechy Voice to confuse the Blastoise, and they're flipping to try to attack. If they are getting through and getting knockouts, then you can just POW the energy off of it repeatedly, throw it back on the bench on something you don't care about, like a Jirachi, for example. Sniff out that POW, just rinse and repeat that combo. It is one of the Sniff Out POW Girafarig. The Future Sight combo is one of the nastiest combos. To be honest with you, I think in the entire history of the Pokemon trading card game. This deck just basically exemplifies every annoying combo the Pokemon trading card game has to offer in literally one deck here. 2 Pokemon Retriever. Considering the fact that almost our entire deck is Pokemon, this is so useful not only to be able to search out energy, but you can also search out the Holen's Pokemon to use for energy, put Pokemon back into the deck, grab a tech Pokemon out that was maybe knocked out, like a Stantler or a Roselia. There's combos with the Swoop Teleporter where if we have to swoop, say, a Lapras, and we can Pokemon Retriever the Lapras back. Just so much utility with this card. I'd love a 3rd copy in the deck, but two is playing just fine for me. 2 copies of Swoop Teleporter. Once again, so incredibly strong in the deck. Just we do have some bad openers in there that lets us switch them out for good openers, or we have some Pokemon that we might want to bench, but we don't want them on our bench forever. So we want to be able to switch it out, or maybe we're building energy on something and we want a different attacker there. Once again, it has just so much utility in the deck. Another card you'd love to play 3 or 4 copies of, but just due to space, we're playing 2 copies of it in the deck. 4 copies of Battle Frontier. We have to be able to shut off that Pidgeot. Also against Dragtrode, we got to be able to shut off that Dark Dragonite, Dark Electrode. The deck, on some levels, I would like to play a Cursed Stone in here, even though it conflicts a little bit with the unknowns. But just due to the controlling strategy of the deck, I don't find that you really need the Cursed Stones like you do in other decks. So essentially, we play the 4 Battle Frontier. A lot of decks are going to play 4 Counter Stadiums, but we're going to use that minimum to sniff out repeated Battle Frontiers, and eventually, we're just going to win that Stadium War. They might be able to trade with us every now and then, but by the end of the game, we're going to admin to a low hand size, Battle Frontier to make sure they don't have any options, lock something active they don't want active, and then we're just going to spread to the bench until we win the game. Once again, incredibly annoying combo, but so strong in the 2006 formats, and so many decks rely on Pidgeot. 1 copy of Warp Energy, just for some of the reasons we talked about before. It's very good against opposing Roselias. If you're playing against like a Flareados deck, for example, Ariados, it's very strong against special conditions. If your opponent has any special conditions, it's very strong against. Just a really, really good utility card. I think you can make some arguments to play a 2nd copy in the deck, but right now I haven't had any issues playing the single copy of it, knowing that I can reuse it with cards like Holen's Cast Form. That's going to go ahead and wrap up the cards for the Mew Lock deck profile. This is, like I said, probably one of the most annoying decks to play in the entire 2006 format, and it basically exemplifies all of the problem cards from the time period for sure. But I really enjoy playing the deck because it has so many different options, and there's so many different strategies, and there's so many different paths to victory that you kind of have to map and figure out, and you'll be in really rough game states and you're like, how do I win this? And you basically have to come up with the line of play that's going to get you to the finish line. And it feels like in most situations, there is a line of play there, but you have to find it. And it feels very rewarding because I feel like a lot of good players can find that path, but a lot of average players struggle to find that path. So I think it's a very good deck for somebody that wants to really test their experience with the Pokemon trading card game, and they really want to. I feel like the deck forces you to grow as a player. On the opposite end of it, players hate to play against this. It's not a fun deck to play against. It's really not. Even decks that play a lot of outs to it can still struggle with it pretty heavily. I was going to do a Jade Plays video on this, but essentially most of the opponents would rage quit within a couple of turns, or things would show up in chat I'm not allowed to put on YouTube. And I get poor sportsmanship, but at the same time too, I also get that it's not a fun deck to play against. Matchup wise, it's going to do very well against any sort of deck that relies heavily on bench sitters. So things like LBS can be very strong against, or it's going to be very strong against decks like LBS. It's going to be weaker against decks that can control the price trade-off. Like Powtar, for example, is very, very, very strong against this deck because they can purposely put themselves down on prizes, make sure you do not have access to that POW hand extension, and then just spread until they're able to take all 6 prizes at once. And I think Powtar is probably the deck that keeps this deck in check the most in the 2006 format and makes it so this deck is not we'll say a problem, but it is just such a fun deck to play. It's a really, really strong deck, but once again, probably will not make you any friends. If anybody has any questions on matchups or how to play the deck, drop them down below and I'll make sure to get to them. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the deck profile on Mew Lock, and I hope to see you in the next video.